Hi, everybody, and welcome. My name is Brooklyn Crawford. I'm a member of the CPUSA and our African American Equality Commission. I'm also a cultural worker, an actress, and an artist. And I'm really excited to be here today. Me and Chauncey Robinson are going to be talking about the film Sinners. We're going to get a little bit into a Marxist analysis of the film and a critique. And then later we'll talk a little bit about Hollywood and the Oscars, and then we'll open the floor up for discussion. So Ryan Coogler's 2025 horror film Sinners has many themes and elements that are worth discussing, but a few particular aspects stuck out to me watching the film not only as a film lover, but as a Marxist who's interested in history, politics, and culture. The first aspect of the film that is major and worth discussion is the aspect of music, obviously and particularly African American blues music. The film opens with the Smokestack twins returning from Chicago to the Mississippi Delta, one twin named Smoke and one named Stack, our first clue that the film will become a great ode to the Delta blues. For his lead characters, Coogler took inspiration from the song Smokestack Lightning, made famous by iconic blues singer, piano player, and harmonica player Howlin' Wolf. Howlin' Wolf himself was born in Mississippi into a sharecropping family, and like many blues singers in the South, Howlin' Wolf used music as a way to escape the oppressive conditions of the proto-slavery system of sharecropping. Interestingly, Coogler himself pointed out that through his research, he found other artists that Howlin' Wolf was inspired from for the title of his song, Smokestack Lightning. Coogler took from Howlin' Wolf for inspiration. Howlin' Wolf took from Charlie Patton, who took inspiration from another. Ryan Coogler found that in the blues, there is no such thing as ownership. It's all shared and inspired from each other, passed down through generations. This idea of generational connection is major throughout the film, particularly in one of its most memorable scenes in what Ryan Coogler calls the surreal montage scene, where, just as he describes in a surreal break from the real events, a performer at a juke joint named Sammy begins singing the blues, but as the camera pans, we are taken throughout time as traditional African dancers move to the beats of drums, as hip-hop heads in the 90s breakdance, as traditional Chinese dancers in dress move about the screen, and as 70s rock stars strum their guitars. Coogler here emphasizes the foundational aspects of not only the blues in American music, but also gives homage to the forms of dance and music which came before it. The enslaved Africans who kept with them their traditional songs and styles, whose memory has survived throughout the progression and development of American culture, are seen as living on not just in spiritual memory, but in the present practice. If you don't know, now you know. This country's most beloved rock stars all say their biggest inspirations were blues musicians. The Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Led Zeppelin, all were inspired directly from blues musicians like Muddy Waters, Howlin' Wolf, and B.B. King. Coogler throughout the film also, as I mentioned, includes other cultures, particularly Chinese American culture and Native American culture, as foundational to the American cultural fabric. He highlights the significance of a multicultural America and makes clear that American culture does not exist without Black people, without Native Americans, Chinese Americans, and so on. Without us, without our work and our creativity, this country would not be the country that produces and exports the most music globally, generating tens of millions of dollars in profit every year. The montage scene also particularly stuck out to me for its creative use of montage. Coogler's use of montage is one that is unique but recognizable. Most of us recognize montage in movies as those scenes where the character is changing their outfit a bunch of times with an 80s rock song playing in the background. But montage as a film technique is really simply defined as editing different selections of film together to form a continuous message. Contrary to traditional editing, which seeks to create a logical progression of film images seamlessly sliced together, montage seeks to create meaning through juxtaposition. The juxtaposition in Coogler's surreal montage scene is evident visually through seeing characters who are out of place in their dress and movement, like the DJ spinning records in a 1930s juke joint, but also emotionally, where the dance, joy, and freedom within the juke joint contrast the oppressive forces which surround it. Montage film editing was developed by Soviet filmmakers like Sergei Eisenstein, where they intentionally selected shots and composition to influence the thoughts of film watchers. The techniques of Soviet film montage were first used to stir up revolutionary emotion in audiences, and while today the use of this technique is not always used for revolutionary purposes, it is widely practiced in a variety of different films, advertisements, and movie trailers. Kugler's use of montage certainly stirred up many emotions for viewers who seemed to connect with this particular scene for its message about the enduring power of music throughout time and our inability to separate ourselves here in the present from our past and our futures. This scene, which highlighted the interconnectedness of people throughout time from different cultures and backgrounds, was also an inciting incident where at the same time outside of the juke joint, Remick, an Irish vampire who wants to be connected with his Irish culture and ancestors, is plotting an attack on the gathering. He is able to do that narratively through turning Sammy, the blues singer who awakens the spirits of the past in the montage scene, into a vampire. Symbolically, many have connected the issue of cultural appropriation to the vampire Remick, who, having lost his own Irish culture through English colonization, seeks to exploit others to have some connection to his past. The film takes on the historical significance of colonization, capitalism, and racism through both a narrative and symbolic lens, where the vampires represent an evil, corruptive force that drains life and steals souls, and at the same time, the characters are beholden to oppressive systems that make it even harder for them to survive the vampiristic attacks. One last thematic element that I'd like to discuss in the film is the idea of assimilation. After failing to invade the juke joint, Remick and his gang attempt to convince the partygoers to leave their lives behind and join them. Remick presents some good arguments for why these humans who are struggling and oppressed should become vampires. He says no matter how many guns or how much money you got, they're going to take it from you when they want. Remick's pitch is that instead of living under a racist, oppressive system where you will be killed, join the vampires and you can become the killer. Remick's gang of vampires are multiracial and they are united in their goals, but they have all lost their human identities and any hope for a normal future. To become a vampire, you must lose the most foundational part of yourself, your humanity. The idea of assimilation is represented not just through the vampires, but internally within the humans. Smoke and Stack are Black business owners who steal and kill for the sake of building a wealthy future. At the beginning of the film, their only goal is to make money, and when confronted with customers at their juke joint who only have wooden nickels, the plantation money that they receive from their sharecropping jobs, Stack is willing to leave behind the sharecroppers for people with real money, while Smoke emphasizes the need to build a connection with community in order to gain long-lasting business. While Smoke is influenced by his girlfriend, Annie, who is connected spiritually to her community and to her own humanity, Stack and his girlfriend, Mary, who is white passing, make plans to try to get white customers, who unbeknownst to them are vampires, to spend their real money at the juke joint. As a result of chasing money and not sticking to their community, Stack and Mary are both eventually turned into vampires, further emphasizing the dangers of capitalist assimilation. This is not even to get into the details of Mary's character, who is fully assimilated into white society, away from her Black family and community. Earlier in the film, she mentions how she didn't want to be white, that she wanted to live a life alongside Stack, but Stack admits that he previously rejected her because he wanted her to have a better life in white society. While assimilating does provide particular benefits and positions of power, whether it be money or status, what Kugler seems to be saying is that no money or status is worth your life or the life of those around you. Kugler has been open about his intentionality while making Sinners. Videos of him explaining film ratios and camera lenses, special effects have gone viral online. He's layered the film with several themes, messages, and motifs, and I certainly was not able to cover them all here in my short presentation. And of course, these connections that I've noticed are only an opinion. Art is meant to be interpreted, and I believe that Kugler wants his audience to do the work of interpreting. There's so much more to dive into, and with that, I'm going to pass the floor over to Chauncey.
Thanks, Brooklyn. Yeah, so my name is Chauncey K. Robinson. I am an associate editor. I am the associate editor at People's World and also a member of the CPUSA. And narrative can help shape the world by shaping the perspective of those who inhabit it. It can expose the truth of matters or obscure it. Narrative can empower people, but it can also defeat them. It can give them knowledge or supply them with misinformation. It can bring to light topics, themes, and stories and highlight their importance, or it can bury them, make light of them, and ultimately dismiss them. The role narrative, and by extension, storytelling, plays in our society is greatly shaped by who controls it. It can be powerful and deadly depending on who dominates it. That's why, when looking at storytelling and culture, it can't be dismissed as a side thing of the working class movement, but an essential element that deserves study, analysis, and engagement. And when it comes to narrative and storytelling, there are many stories and art that help to add to the diverse tapestry that is history, a history that we do well to be knowledgeable about in time to draw inspiration from, but in other instances, not repeat the same travesties. The film Sinners is a movie, although in a fiction fantasy realm, that allows us to explore real world happenings, both past and present, to explore themes relevant to today, and also learn about often overlooked bits of history that can influence our understanding of the current struggles faced. And it does this in one of the best genres possible to do it in, horror. Horror is a genre that has, since the early days of film, been at the forefront of exploring topics often deemed taboo in some instances and unsettling in others, particularly for the wealthy elite. As film began to dominate the entertainment realm, it of course drew the attention of the wealthy, who saw not a new element for artistic expression, but a new avenue to make a profit. And with that attention came the suppression of the more expressive forms of film that began in the early 1900s. The Hays Code, a set of self imposed mandatory film industry rules governing the so called moral content of US films to avoid government censorship from 1934 to 1968, attempted to clamp down on much of that expression. Horror allowed a bit more wiggle room because it could be more symbolic in its themes, thus flying under the radar of censorship while still expressing views on certain topics, not just in the US, but around the world. Films like Nosferatu of 1922 explored these themes of xenophobia, sexuality, and so on. It is seen as a quintessential vampire film to watch, and rightly so, because even over 100 years later, much of what is dealt with in the film is relevant to today. Sinners carries on that tradition. The best kind of vampire film understands that there are worse things in society than blood-sucking monsters with fangs. When movies in this genre lean into this legacy with bold, imaginative storytelling, that result can often be compelling, original stories that lure us in with terror and keep us captivated with the very human condition at the heart of it all. Ryan Coogler's film achieved such a feat. The film combines horror, history, blues music, and Black American folklore for a thrilling journey into darkness of both the supernatural and everyday varieties. So I think I don't want to assume everyone knows like the summary of the film, but basically they accumulated under mysterious circumstances, the twins, a big amount of cash, and they purchased a sawmill from a racist landowner. Their plan: start a juke joint for the local Black community, but opening night at the club is when the terror begins because they are basically affronted by a ancient Irish vampire named Remick, who sets his sights on Sammy. Sinners is a story steeped in real history, interweaving the Black American experience in the early 1900s and the origins of song and dance throughout multiple cultures, as Brooklyn noted, Black, Chinese, and Irish. The film encompasses numerous themes. Even if it doesn't delve deeply into all of them, the acknowledgement is there, such as history. The time period in Sinners is key. One, for the fact that we don't often get stories in this era centered on Black people in mainstream media. At times, it can feel like Hollywood films only acknowledge and bring about Black characters during slavery, the 1950s through the 60s civil rights movement, and some more modern tales today. But the era of Sinners, the 1930s, is rich in history, offering a clearer perspective on the plight of Black working people in the United States during a tumultuous time in the nation's history. Smoke and Stack are war veterans in a time of history marked by unique racial complexities. While it's said there were many Black men who eagerly enlisted in the military when Uncle Sam issued the call during the First World War, many others faced an onslaught of discriminatory conscription practices. For example, predominantly white draft boards targeted Black men for war at higher rates than whites. And while comprising just 10% of the entire United States population, Black people supplied 13% of the inductees in World War I. By 1932, the Great Depression was in full swing. This historic economic collapse affected working people of all ethnicities. Yet it was an extremely challenging period for Black Americans, as they faced high unemployment, discrimination, and increased racial violence all at the same time. Lynchings by the white supremacist domestic terrorist group, the Ku Klux Klan, were on the rise. Black people were often the first to be laid off from their jobs, suffering from an unemployment rate 2 to 3 times that of their white counterparts. These challenges factored into what became known as the Great Migration, the period when large numbers of Black people migrated from the South to urban areas in the North and West, seeking better economic opportunities. And on top of that, far too often, sanitized mainstream history would have us believe the North was a racially enlightened region immune to inequality and discrimination. While racism may not have always been as overt in the South, Black people face discrimination there as well. This is the world the twins and Sammy find themselves in. It's clear that Stack and Smoke have turned their less than lawful lives due to the cards society has dealt them. They come up with their plan of ripping off the mob in Chicago and then going back to their hometown to start a business because they recognize the power imbalance in society. They served their country in war and came back to a country that was thankless for it, and at times downright cruel. There is an understanding by the brothers that playing by society's rules for Black people, a society embedded with white supremacy and greed through exploitation of the oppressed, won't get them far in life. This gray area when it comes to morality is a prevalent theme in the movie. It's called Sinners, after all. And then you have the religion and spirituality aspect. Through Sammy and his struggle to appease his preacher father, the role of Christianity in the Black community is explored. His father is a local preacher who disapproves of Sammy's desire to play the blues. His father wants him to follow in his footsteps and become a pastor, preaching the Christian gospel. As Sammy spends the day with his cousins, the twins, he is introduced to concepts that challenges his father's teachings. A particularly poignant moment occurs when Sammy is talking to pianist Delta Sim, who asserts to Sammy that while Christianity was pushed on Black people when they came to America, blues music originates in Black people's souls. It's what they brought here with them that no one can take away. The power that music has on culture, and in some cases being a form of resistance, is prevalent throughout the film, both in the heroes and the villains. Through the character of Annie, another aspect of Black spirituality explored. Annie is a hoodoo practitioner. Hoodoo, with an H, is a Black American spiritual tradition that uses conjure, magical ritual, and root work, a healing system developed by Black people in the American South. Developed from various African diaspora religions and culminating within the framework of Black American culture, it focuses on listening to and interacting with the Black ancestors for guidance. This aspect of Black spirituality isn't often highlighted in mainstream entertainment. When it comes to displays of the spirituality of Black Americans on screen, it often occurs within the rigid confines of Christianity, usually Baptist, or a caricaturized version of voodoo, with a V, associated with Haiti. That's not to say that Coogler vilifies Christianity. Hoodoo actually has some Christian traditions within it, but he challenges the box that Black Americans are often put in when it comes to the topic. The Black church, particularly during the Civil Rights Movement, played a critical role in being a place to organize. Even today, there are Christian faith leaders who carry on the tradition of the liberation gospel, like the Poor People's Campaign led by Reverend William Barber. But we are also in a time when white Christian nationalism and draconic notions of Christianity are attempting to dominate American society through oppressive notions on women's rights, LGBTQ, and the like. And while this is ramped up in years, it is something, even during the eras of sinners, that has also been used by those in power to silence and control the population. Sinners does well in showing there's nuance to the matter and that Black American spirituality can't be placed in a simple box. And then there's the intersectional struggle. The main villain in the story is an Irish vampire leader named Remick. Remick also serves as the other in white supremacist society. He even mentions as much to the twins and Sammy that his origins aren't so different from their own. Sinners connects the very comparable struggle of the people of Ireland to those of Black Americans. The oppression of the Irish people carried out by the British Empire spanned centuries, involving political, economic, and social persecution that deeply impacted them, bringing about widespread poverty, famine, and immigration. Even in the United States early on, Irish migrants new to the US were targeted as not being pure white. It's made clear in the film that Coogler's choice of Remick's background is deliberate and just as important when it comes to his interactions with other characters. Like the twins, Remick recognizes the power imbalance in society and the rampant oppression he chooses the route of violence and domination, thus mimicking his oppressors in response to his own valid anger for the hand society has dealt him. And then there's vampirism. That brings us to the idea of becoming a vampire and what the actual act of becoming a vampire represents in the film. In the film, it is said that when one becomes a vampire, they are cut off from one's ancestors. One twin embraces becoming a vampire, choosing a path of domination and violence in response to feeling powerless in this world. The other, and some others and characters, choose death, or rather resistance, seeing being a vampire as giving up elements of themselves they would rather not part with, even if it leaves them vulnerable. The film doesn't seem to make a clear judgment one way or the other, but one could see vampirism as representing the choice of how one functions under capitalism. For some, it can be easy to lean into the greed, the individualistic nature of capitalism, the violence, seeing it as a means of survival, while others choose to lean into community, resilience, and ultimately a true moral high ground of love and connection. I'd be curious to hear what others think about that. But ultimately, Sinners gives us much to analyze and explore, and in particular to Black American culture, which I think is important to emphasize. Black American culture is unique and a key part of American history. Black Americans as a group have such a rich culture because they are a unique group shaped by and shaping the inception and change within the United States. And the film really zeroes in on an aspect of that while acknowledging its influences and establishes that Black American culture is unique and layered in its own right. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Brooklyn.
Thanks, Chauncey. So now we're going to get a little bit into Hollywood and the Oscars a little bit. So Sinners has taken on the film industry by storm since its release. The film industry and film production companies are usually wary to give big budgets to original films like Sinners. They count on the formulaic scripts of Marvel movies to bring in the big checks. And not so coincidentally, Coogler himself directed 2 Marvel films, The Black Panther and its sequel, in addition to the boxing film franchise Creed. Having the experience with big budget films, Coogler was able to leverage his previous successes to demand even more. After meeting with several studios, Warner Brothers agreed to take Sinners on with Coogler's demands, giving him nearly $100 million budget and a deal which guaranteed him ownership rights to the film after 25 years. Ownership rights of a film for directors has happened before, but really only to household name directors or directors who have had to build lifelong careers, like American director Quentin Tarantino. While having directed major hits, Ryan Coogler has a relatively shorter resume and is still only in his 30s. This is a major win not only for Black filmmakers and young filmmakers, but all filmmakers who will likely benefit from the new precedents being set in regards to who's allowed to demand more. This has been to the dismay of major studios who seek to generate as much profit for themselves as possible. But not only do they demand to take money from the fruits of creative workers' labor, they also infringe on the creative decisions which make films so popular in the first place. Often, production companies will edit scripts and take out important scenes that they think are too costly. Famously, in the Oscar-winning and beloved American film Forrest Gump, Paramount Pictures executives told director Bob Zemeckis that he would have to cut the part of the film where Forrest Gump runs across the country, a very iconic scene, saying that it would be too expensive to film. Zemeckis and actor Tom Hanks agreed to pay for that scene out of their own salaries, with the caveat that they would be repaid if the film was successful, and undoubtedly it was. As a part of his deal, Coogler also guaranteed himself final cut decisions of the film, which is not something that all or even all well-known directors get to have. When creatives are able to control creative decision as opposed to executives who only seek to save and generate money, the lasting success of the film can be enormous. This is true not only for big budget, big box office smashes like Sinners or Forrest Gump, but it is also true of the work of independent films made with low budgets by a fully creatively empowered team. These indie films, while not always financially successful, grow audiences over decades, as opposed to the recycled scripts that Hollywood studios pump out, which may generate profit for a short amount of time, but don't usually have the enduring impact of film that is made for art's sake, not for profit's sake. While artists want to express their creativity and originality, capitalists tend to want to reproduce what has already been successful. This, I believe, is a part of a larger cultural problem, which tends to capitalize off of trends that reproduce generic versions of the same product in 50 different fonts. We see this not only in film, but in music, fashion, even food. How many restaurants have y'all been to recently with some version of a hot honey flavored dish? I was at a coffee shop yesterday and they had a hot honey flavored latte. Maybe that's too niche for New York, but I'm hoping that you get my point. While it's not necessarily bad for things to be popular or trending, I think it's important to point out how capitalism not only profits from conformity, but ideologically needs some sense of conformity to maintain power over culture and in order to try to control people's way of thinking. Films not only reflect society, they can influence the way that people think about society, think about ideas, morals, and politics. When a filmmaker like Coogler says that he wants to create a vampire musical movie about racism in the South, it goes against conventional standards of not only what has previously generated the most profit, but also about what people should be interested in. Capitalists tend to underestimate and misevaluate the tastes of the masses. It will tell creatives, nobody's going to like that. But as soon as that thing organically becomes popular, capitalists are the first to try to take advantage of the moment, to exploit that originality, and often twist the original version into something that's less impactful and useful, often due to budget cuts and profit motive. We've all noticed how the quality of our products at home have dwindled, how things break too easily, how clothes don't last as long as they used to. Film and art generally are a part of this general degradation of quality that capitalism has influenced. While the film industry celebrates the uniqueness of individual artists who have achieved success, the film industry, as a part of the general capitalist system, also promotes a culture of conformity that restricts and influences artistic and creative decision-making. One example of this rejection of conformity in Sinners is the casting choices, particularly for the role of Annie, played by English-Nigerian actress Wunmi Mosaku. Many viewers have praised the casting of a dark-skinned woman who is not thin, being cast as the love interest opposite Hollywood heartthrob Michael B. Jordan. Audiences, through conventional Hollywood casting, have become accustomed to seeing women who look like Wunmi being cast as mothers, as caretakers, and other kinds of roles that go back to the racist Hollywood trope of the mammy character. Annie's character in the film is represented not only as a desirable love interest, but also as a complex hero who grounded the film in its messages about connection and humanity. Interestingly, the other romantic opposite to Michael B. Jordan's role as the twins is Haley Steinfeld, a longtime leading lady in Hollywood who does fit into conventional beauty standards of whiteness and thinness. I think that it's through this contrast that audiences were able to notice just how absent leading romantic roles are for certain kinds of women. These standards and perceptions about Black women still prevail, and while Wunmi is receiving attention and critical acclaim, institutional problems still persist. The New Yorker has come under recent criticism for an illustration depicting Wunmi, which many felt didn't accurately represent her beauty. People know that even something as simple as an illustration can shape people's perceptions and expectations. The beauty standards of society, which are not only reflected by Hollywood, but largely shaped by Hollywood, where actresses who influence millions are often under strict diets, beauty routines, and cosmetic surgeries, are important to discuss here. Sinners has received the most nominations for a film in Oscar history. It received 16 nominations, and there's no doubt that Sinners is beloved by audiences. But will it be formally and institutionally recognized? When it was first released, publications like Variety questioned the success of the film and its artistic merit. It published the headline, "Do box office numbers really matter?" which many were quick to point out that box office numbers have significantly mattered when it's come to white films of similar quality and depth. One of the nominations Sinners received was for Best Director, and if he wins, Ryan Coogler will become the first Black director in Oscars history to receive the award. This fact alone says something about how deep institutional racism is, how much progress there still is to achieve, and how slow we have been moving. Interestingly, his biggest competition in the Best Director category, Paul Thomas Anderson, is also nominated for Best Director in the film for his movie One Battle After Another. But Paul Thomas Anderson also has yet to receive an Oscar for Best Director, even after being nominated for that award 5 times. Paul Thomas Anderson is a respected and consistent high-quality filmmaker, and although he is a white man, has been consistently, quote unquote, snubbed by the Oscars. Maybe it's the fact that his most notable film, There Will Be Blood, is a great criticism of capitalism and greed in modern cinema. But I guess what I'm really trying to get at here is that the Oscars can often get it wrong. While at times they do get it right, audiences across the country and the world have always been yelling at their screens that they made the wrong choice. I just found out recently that this year will be the first year that the Academy will be required to watch all films in a category before casting their vote, which just seems crazy to me because it's like, how can you judge the quality of somebody's work if you haven't even engaged with it? It made me ask the question, how many films, actors, and directors have been excluded from recognition on the simple basis that no one cared enough to pay attention? I think with going into the Oscars tonight, we have to be aware that though this institution holds much power when it comes to the careers and lives of the artists that we love and admire, and that we want people to succeed, that recognition from the Oscars is not the determining factor of what is a good film or what is a bad film. Audiences and the masses of people across the world will determine who and what represent their feelings about the world. Audiences should be encouraged to make their own judgments about what films are worth the hype. We should be empowered to engage critically with films and not to just go with whatever the institutions say are popular or popular messaging says is good. After all, these institutions have their own agendas, and if we as audiences put more emphasis on filmmaking that doesn't always abide by conventional standards or norms, we might end up with more films like Sinners. Not a Sinners prequel or sequel per se, but I mean more original films by people with different perspectives, attitudes, and messages. Films that confront capitalist conformity and the hegemony of the ruling class. And I'm going to pass it back over to Chauncey.
Thanks, Brooklyn. Okay, so it's Oscars night, and the time of the Academy Awards, and overall what is known in Hollywood as award season. The Oscars are usually seen as the climax of the season, as much importance is put on those golden statues they put out. Sinners has made history this season by being at the top of the awards list, and as a predominantly Black film with so many nominations. To be clear, the recognition that the film is getting is justified and important. Films telling the stories of Black people that don't directly depict slavery, getting the kind of recognition that Sinners is getting, are far and few in between in mainstream media. Particularly films that challenge the status quo and so-called tried and true notions of who Black Americans are. That is something to celebrate. With that said, it's also important to understand the framework within which Sinners exists within the Hollywood ecosystem, and more so expand that to the capitalist system Hollywood is part of and influenced by. When the film industry first began, it was something of the Wild Wild West. Film was a new phenomenon and was starting to hit the mainstream in the early 1900s. With that, as mentioned earlier, came the wealthy bosses who saw the new cultural phenomenon as a means of making lots of money. With that money came a drive for profit and so-called marketability. This is why the Hays Code came into play, and eventually the MPAA, that thing that rates, PG, rated R, things like that, as a means to categorize what was shown to audiences. Yet films didn't come from the ether. They were created and produced by workers. From in front of the camera to behind it, cultural workers helped bring these stories to the big screen. And as profits grew and large movie studios began dominating Hollywood, so too came the demands of the workers to get their fair share of the profits and safe working conditions to do so. In response to this, the studio bosses created the Academy Awards as a way to distract these workers from forming unions. And that's not just from me, that's from the people themselves who said it, the studio heads. In 1927, Metro Goldwyn Mayer Studios executive Louis B. Mayer was doing his damnedest to keep actors from unionizing. Louis B. Mayer was one of the top bosses at Metro Goldwyn Mayer, which many of you would know as MGM Studios. Back in the day, most of the revenue made from the film went back to the studio's pockets in most films. It's documented that Mayer, and most likely his studio head counterparts, were worried that they'd have to share those profits with newly unionized workers. One had already begun at that time, the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees, IATSE, which was unionizing studio laborers. Mayer came up with a plan he thought would trick workers into believing unions were unnecessary. Mayer decided that he would create the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences in order to be a go-between or mediator to work out disputes that came up between the studios and the people within the industry that had yet not joined a union. It has also served as a public relations arm to make Hollywood seem more sanitized to so-called middle America, aka censored and refined, quote unquote. The studio boss was later quoted as saying, "I found that the best way to handle movie makers was to hang medals all over them. If I got them cups and awards, they killed themselves to produce what I wanted. That's why the Academy Awards was created," end quote. Instead of giving his employees things like a share of film profits, health insurance, and other benefits, he created what we know now as the Academy Awards. It started as a plot by the bosses to appeal to the individualistic vanity of its workers in the hopes that they would abandon their pursuit of collectivity through the unions. Now, of course, this didn't work. As we see today, there are plenty of unions, such as the one mentioned before, SAG-AFTRA, the Writers Guild, the Directors Guild, the Animation Guild, and so on. Yet the battle between the greed of the bosses and the welfare of the culture workers is ever raging. There have been multiple strikes. One just a few years back that has had Hollywood bosses respond with restrictions, budget cuts, and the like, putting the industry in a rough spot as the millionaire studio heads and execs endure, while the cultural workers fear they may not be able to afford to continue to do the work they love of telling stories and making art. The entertainment industry has undergone several upheavals in recent years, including the global COVID-19 pandemic, 2 significant labor strikes, a decrease in production both globally and in Los Angeles, and the looming threat of AI to creative jobs. Even now, the threat of AI, artificial intelligence, and studio bosses attempting to use the technology unethically to replace or cut the work of writers, animators, editors, and in some cases, even actors loom large over the industry. Add to that the politically motivated consolidation of power among the studio bosses, creating media monopolies that threaten workers' ability to bargain. This is seen in full view through the potential merger of the studio Paramount Skydance with Warner Brothers Studios. Warner Brothers, coincidentally enough, is the one that produced Sinners, a merger that many unions condemn, knowing that such a monopoly will not bode well for workers as the power to get stories to the public is consolidated into fewer and fewer hands. It is also an industry that is not immune to the trappings of racism, sexism, and white supremacist ideology, as a representation of groups other than white and or white males is still lacking. This is the framework in which Sinners finds itself. Hollywood is not some fantasy land or la la land filled with glitz and glamour. It is an industry that has workers and bosses, one that is affected by the class struggle and one that is not immune to capitalism's ills. Within this industry, stories of resistance and perseverance have emerged, ones that champion and showcase the stories of the marginalized. And in some cases, on the other flip side, capitalist propaganda, red baiting, and blacklisting have been allowed to be carried out at one time or another. Fun fact, The CIA purchased the rights to George Orwell's book, Animal Farm, a story that uses animals on a farm to represent workers' revolution. Had the film produced, animated, and altered the ending to be anti-communist. In the original, the farmers look at both the human farmers, the farm animals look at both the human farmers and the new tyrannical pigs and wonder if both sides have faults. The CIA removed the human farmers so that the focus of condemnation would be on the pig characters, who were seen as representative of a communist-led government. They took a story that was originally Orwell's condemnation of authoritarianism and turned it into an anti-communist one instead. This is just one of the many examples that illustrate the Hollywood ecosystem and how it can shape narratives based on who is in charge and allowed to tell their stories or stories. With the current White House regime of Donald Trump, his FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, and the various media moguls wanting favor with the regime, such as Paramount, we are in time when the right wing sees the power of storytelling and is attempting to dominate it. Also, there has been a push to refer to film, TV, writing, and other forms of cultural expression as content, as a means to play down what is actually involved in those artistic expressions, filmmakers, writers, and laborers. This push to change to a more commodifying rhetoric around artistic expression can be likened to what Marx explained as commodity fetishism, where capitalism obscures the human labor behind products, making goods, in this case, films, TV, etc., appear to have a value independent of the work that created them, thus hiding the exploitation. Mainstream media and Hollywood are another frontier in the battle of ideas. We can celebrate the recognition of sinners in Hollywood while also recognizing the struggles for working people within the industry and outside of it when it comes to producing stories, but also the stories that get to be told to the public. Politics isn't just what happens on Capitol Hill. That's why it's important to know what's going on with the workers in this industry and also with the stories that make it on the big and small screens.
Okay, well, thank you, Chauncey, and thank you, Brooklyn, for your penetrating analysis of the movie and the setting. Before we open the floor for comments and questions, we'd like to invite everyone to make a donation to People's World. People's World is a news outlet, peoplesworld.org, which takes sides. The news paper online takes sides. It takes the sides of working people. And we're in the midst of a People's World fund drive. So we'd like to invite everyone to take a minute to make a contribution to the paper, People's World, at this time. So we're looking through the attendee list. We'd like to invite those of you who have a comment or a question to click the picture of the hand on your control panel. Bill, go ahead, Bill.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. As much as we focus on Hollywood in terms of the society in this country, a very critical aspect of the industry has been, both in terms of profits and in terms of ideology, the impact that U.S. films make overseas. More and more films also are being made overseas, but even the films still made in Hollywood, that's a major factor. It was a major factor in the famous strike in Hollywood in the late 40s that Gerald Horne so wonderfully documented. Could you say more about that today, what's happening today in terms of the international impact of the film industry?
Thank you, Bill. Okay, Sharon, the mic, there you are.
Thank you. Thank you, Brooklyn and Chauncey, for a really penetrating and beautiful analysis. I can't wait to read it or watch you again. Sinner's main rival apparently is One Battle After Another. And I wonder if you can comment on the political or cultural content of that movie. To me, it makes revolutionaries look stupid and weird, to say the least. But I was wondering what you think of that movie.
Okay, thank you, Sharon. And we will turn it back to Chauncey and Brooklyn.
Did you want to go Brooklyn first, or?
Oh, sorry, I cut off there a minute.
Oh, I was saying, did you want to go first, or do you want to?
Yeah, so I don't know too much about the current international, to answer the first question. I wouldn't say that I'm well informed enough to know about the current international impacts of Hollywood film on other countries. But one thing I will say that I do know a little bit about is this kind of rising tide of international films being represented at the Oscars, and how I think that there is kind of a push within America and the Hollywood industry to maybe not want to recognize international films as much, because they kind of want to maintain that dominance of being the ones who make the most profit from the films in Hollywood. But that's been changing. I know that the movie Parasite did incredibly successful here, which is a film that was not made here. And there are other kind of more internationally recognized films and other international award shows, like the Cannes Film Festival is a really big festival that films are recognized at, that, you know, sometimes pick a different selection of films that are not always the same as the films that are recognized here in America. So I think that what is recognized in the international film world is not always the same as what America kind of puts up as like the top tier films.
Yeah. Well, speak to the first one. Well, I was gonna, I guess, in terms of very much what Brooklyn was saying, but also in terms of just production and stuff, like I had mentioned earlier, the production in the US and the Los Angeles in general is down right now. Like, I think in the teens to the 20s percentages. And so what you're having is a lot of, and that's usually due to like tax codes and things like that. And what you have is a lot of these studios starting to produce overseas more. And so you have, and that's been an ongoing problem, especially for the unions and stuff like that, because you have this situation where, you know, either people are having to like go all the way across the waters to basically to find work in their own industry, or the studios are hiring local people who may or may not be unionized in some cases. So what you have is a changing industry, both, I mean, because of globalization, of course, but you have, you know, the unions having to kind of figure out the way forward as well, in terms of, you know, making so that people who are here in the US who are unionized have work, but also, you know, about maybe trying to unionize across seas as well to the workers over there, or how that works. So I mean, production's down, and it's an upheaval kind of time for the industry as a whole, I think, overall, unfortunately. I was just going to speak to One Battle After Another. I absolutely love that film. And I actually think it's kind of interesting that I actually love the fact that both Sinners and One Battle After Another, which another film that actually, you know, centers on a few Black characters in that one as well, are doing so well in the Oscar circuit. I think, you know, the thing about, I mean, it's just like the complexity of Sinners. I'll just say this about One Battle After Another, because you could have a whole other panel about it, is that it shows the complexity of, it's based off of a book, right, from the 1960s. And the 1960s, the book, well, it was came out 80s, but like the book basically was focusing on like the hippie movement of the 60s or whatever. And so what the director of One Battle After Another did, he placed it more so in the Black Power movement, or more so, you know, a little bit more centered around that. And so and the left movement, not just the Black Power movement, I should say. And I want to just say that it shows the complexity of the left. I thought it showed that, you know, at times the left can get caught up in principles over actual practicality. This idea, like, there's a whole funny scene about him on the phone trying to get the password, and the guy just being like, you can't get through without the password, comrade. And it's like, do you understand what's actually happening here? And I think honestly, one could argue it's a reflection of how We've had issues on the left when it comes to, you know, voting, when it comes to who we support, when it comes to the issues and where we put our energy. And I think it shows that complexity in a funny kind of way. I don't think it shows them as stupid, but I think it shows the frustration that can happen when it comes to the movement as a whole in some cases.
Brooklyn, did you want to comment on the movie?
Yeah,
Okay.
film, and so my heart is kind of torn between Sinners and One Battle After Another. I hope they both get awards and get that recognition. But I also agree. I felt like it was critical, definitely, of the left, but I feel like I was happy that at least the left was being represented in a somewhat complex way. I feel like a lot of the time in movies, it kind of simplifies our movements and either makes them seem really ridiculous or really, really extreme without kind of showing the inner logics or like the inner thoughts of like why people are acting in certain ways that they are. So that was something that I appreciated about the film. I understand that there's been a lot of criticism from the way that some of the particular Black characters are represented, particularly Tiana Taylor's character. Some people felt like it was kind of stereotypy and kind of represented Black women in a negative way. But then also I've been hearing from other people kind of countering that criticism that, you know, Black people shouldn't have to be represented in such a perfect way all of the time in films, and why is it that, you know, when white characters are playing people who make mistakes or who are maybe reactionary in some way, there isn't that same kind of weight on their shoulders, which is something that I can understand too. Generally, I really appreciated the film, and I mentioned a little bit in my presentation, I'm a big fan of Paul Thomas Anderson's films, and I think that he has a good general criticism of systems, and he kind of makes audiences ask questions, which is something that I appreciate.
Okay, let's see if there are any other comments or questions. All right, Terry, your mic is, there you are.
When I saw Smoke and Stack, I couldn't help but think of some of the great experiments and horrifically repressed experiments in Black entrepreneurialism of the period in which the film is set and the period right before it, such as Greenwood in Oklahoma, and then there was the failure of Deerfield in Colorado, where I live. And so I wondered if experiments like that is one of the things that Kugler had in mind with the characters of Smoke and Stack, and if therefore that kind of obscured the agency of the Black working class as opposed to the Black bourgeoisie. Did Kugler's vision sort of unite the Black bourgeoisie with the Black working class? Or was differentiating between those two too much to ask of this film? I hope that question makes some kind of sense.
Thank you, Terry, and we'll take another hand. Tina, your mic is open.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, great. This has been a fabulous, thank you, Chauncey, thank you, Brooklyn. I so much wanted to talk to other people. A lot of my friends have not seen Sinners, and I so much wanted to talk to other people about it. And you answered a lot of my questions. And you answered a lot about the Irish. In the very beginning of the movie, they mentioned an Irish tradition, which I'm not familiar with. It's similar to the griot. And so, and I also noticed that the Irish who became vampires, they were, or a couple of them were, or at least one of them was already in the Klan or supporting the Klan. I don't know. If you could say more about that, I would love it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tina. All right. So, okay, given the hour, if you could respond to those questions and comments and also give your summary, starting with, is that too much?
No, good.
Okay, starting with Brooklyn. Okay.
Yeah, so to answer a little bit of the first question, I hope that I hope I'm understanding your question correctly about, I guess, Kugler's vision about the Black bourgeoisie and the characters of Smoke and Stack and its relationship to Black working class people. I did watch a few interviews with Ryan Coogler where the interviewer was kind of very direct, asking him about Karl Marx and capitalism. And he seemed a little bit wary to kind of directly answer those questions, but he kind of did subliminally acknowledge that he definitely had a criticism of capitalism in mind when making the film. And I think that a big part of the film, which is acknowledged, as I mentioned in my first presentation, with Remek's character, basically saying that basically telling them that even if the vampires didn't kill them, that tomorrow the KKK was coming to plan to kill them anyway. And that them owning that business was basically a pipe dream. And that any attempt to try to be a capitalist was going to fail, or any attempt to try to assimilate into the system was going to fail. So I can't speak to Ryan Coogler's direct vision or perspective on Black business owners, but I definitely think he has a general criticism there and was trying to highlight that kind of contradiction. Yeah. And then for the second question, I'm sorry, it was about the Irish vampires. I'm sorry, what was the question again?
I think just speaking to their representation and how one of the white vampires was actually originally in the KKK.
Yeah, I'm not sure if those the white vampires who were in the KKK were actually Irish. They might have been, and maybe I just missed that, but it seemed like Remek wasn't really, like I said, his entire kind of vampire gang was multiracial and came from different backgrounds and all of this stuff. It didn't really seem like he cared if somebody was white or Irish or Black or whatever. That his intention was mainly to get as many people on his side as possible. But yeah, and then I'll just pass it over to Chauncey.
Yeah, well, I was just gonna say to the whole question of like entrepreneurism and things like that. There's a thing in the American dream that always tries to push the thing. You can start a business. You can start a business, and I do think there's a little bit of this idea that of escapism of your class in a way when there's this idea of like I can get higher up and whatnot. So there's that aspect of it, because even though the twins started their business, they were also still working class. I mean, that business wasn't fruitful yet. I mean, and that's a lot of the cases even now and has been for some time, where they pour a lot of money into it, and a lot of the times the odds are stacked against people. And particularly working class people to have successful multi-million-dollar businesses. That's really just statistically not usually the case anyway, but that is pushed on them because of the idea of thinking, I don't want to be the worker, or I don't want to be under the thumb of someone else. I want to be the boss at this time. Kind of this idea of kind of trying to switch and whatnot. And then on the other aspect of that, we've had throughout history, like Black Wall Street and others, where when there's financial gain and things made, the terrorism of the domestic terrorists of Ku Klux Klan and white supremacy very much tried to and have had a chokehold on Black businesses and Black financial security. So there's still that ongoing thing of, yeah, they tell you this American dream of anyone could be this and you could be an entrepreneur, but there are things embedded within the capitalist system that makes it a rigged game. And I think in a way that's what Sinners kind of gets at there, with them kind of taking this money and being like, we're going to start a juke joint and we're going to do this. But it's like, yeah, you've already got the odds stacked against you for a number of reasons. And I think Coogler touches on that. And yeah, when it comes to the think of the of Remick, who I thought was a great villain. Kugler's actually really good at making villains that make you kind of want to agree with them. He actually did it, funny enough, with Michael B. Jordan in Black Panther, in the first Black Panther, where he was playing a villain who felt wronged and things like that. And I think what it shows is the complexity of where anger can go. And I did think it was funny with the white vampires, where one of them is a member of the Ku Klux Klan, who was part of the plot to eventually go and to try to go to the jukebox joint afterwards to kill the twins, is that they were very hateful at first. And then during the movie, they're like, we're just preaching love after they become vampires, which it's kind of like, well, maybe more of them need to become vampires. I don't know. But it was, I think it just showed, depending on what path you choose, how it's not necessarily set in stone. And that's the whole thing with the white workers of the working class, right? It's the thing of racism doesn't benefit them, right? It's a push. It was the whole idea of racism, of white supremacy, was a ploy by the wealthy to separate working people. It's been since the inception of this country with the indentured servants, when the black and white indentured servants were joining together in their revolts, and so they created the white class to kind of say, well, you've got more in common with us than your black working workers, there. And so I think what we see also is that intersectionality of there being no real benefit to racism for working class people as a whole, not even the white people, whether it's, I mean, you get a few immediate privileges, but that doesn't go very far when it comes to the exploitation you experience under capitalism.
Okay, well, we'd like to thank Brooklyn and Chauncey for this penetrating examination of Sinners and the Oscars. Wow, didn't know that history. And Hollywood. And we look forward to the next time. So if there's anything that comes forward which merits our examination, let us know so that we can at least have a conversation, whether we agree or not, but at least have a conversation. So thank you again for taking the time to do the work, to offer an analysis worth considering. And before we leave, we'd like to invite everyone for the last time, please make a contribution to People's World. Just go to peoplesworld.org and hit the donate button. Big business does not contribute to the well-being of peoplesworld.org. It depends on ordinary working class people like us in order to help it thrive and grow as we need it to do today. So thank you again, everyone, for participating. Thank you, Chauncey. Thank you, Brooklyn, and enjoy the rest of your day and the rest of your weekend. Bye.
Goodbye.